live on YouTube.
Oh, good. So it's doing its thing. Done. Redirecting. There we are. Good. Get my piece of paper.
Okay. I'm going to use that. There we go. Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear us? Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. We're having some audio issues. We will wait just one more minute for everyone to trickle on and then get started. Go ahead and share my screen. Go. Okay, 10:03, you think we're good? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. We wanted to just set aside 2 hours for all of our advisory members to just drop in and ask questions, as you guys might have it on the evaluation survey that I sent out to you all, I guess 2 Fridays ago now. So I'm just going to run through a really quick presentation just to put us in the context, some background and purpose of this evaluation, building on what we talked about in March, but adding in some more detail of the materials that you all have received. And then we'll just have an open time of question and answer, but just wanted to start off with a little bit of context as a reminder on what we're doing, since it's been a while since we all met in March. So just to kick us off, we talked a lot about this in the March advisory groups meeting, but this is really the question that we're trying to answer in this first round of evaluation: what the future of Louisiana looks like under different scenarios of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So we want to take this big picture look before we move to the more granular level as the year moves forward. So something we talk about a lot in this effort is that it matters how we reach our goals, how we reduce those emissions. So we've created all of these fundamental objectives throughout this effort, the first few months of our time together. And these objectives are what we will evaluate those scenarios of reducing emissions against this. And so you all as advisory members play a very central role in forecasting the consequences of what different approaches to reducing emissions looks like. And so we'll understand those consequences against our fundamental objectives. And so this is the step that we're in right now with you guys. And there will be 2 rounds of evaluation in this climate planning process. So the first one is what we're doing right now at the strategy level, taking these big picture views of the future through hypothetical emission reduction scenarios. Like we talked about in March, turning the knobs all the way on of these big picture scenarios to see what happens. And then in that second round in August through September, we'll have portfolios again with strategies, but adding that more granular level of detail with actions. So these will be called action portfolios because they'll be much more detailed with specific policies and programs that will be proposed throughout this process. And as you guys know, we just finished soliciting that open call for action ideas with all of you, with the members of the public. Our committee is the task force. And so we want to allow a few months to work through and refine those actions before we bring them into the fold of evaluation. So as we like to do when moving to a next step in this process is just laying out what are our goals that we want to achieve. And so first, we want you all to weigh in on important considerations in how we reduce our emissions. And this survey format is the way that we want you guys to do that, in a way that encourages brainstorming and getting your feedback, and asking you all to predict the potential positive and negative impacts of different strategies. So all of this is to frame for the Climate Task Force in their June and July meetings so that they can make informed decisions and ensure that we have success and positive outcomes in how we approach emission reduction. So that's really our goal here, setting up those conversations for the summertime in the task force. So this survey will be used to get your input on fundamental objectives, but the one objective that we don't have you guys addressing is in evaluating the greenhouse gas emission reduction potential. So I just wanted to briefly touch on that, since we didn't talk through that in the evaluation materials that we sent out, because we know none of these portfolios will represent a net zero scenario. There's going to be some combination of a few or all of these different scenarios. So we don't want you guys to focus on quantifying the greenhouse gas reduction potential. Our planning team will reference multiple sources and frame and estimate what we anticipate the magnitude of emission reduction potential might look like for each portfolio. So we're using the draft greenhouse gas inventory update, the beta version of the Louisiana Energy Policy Solutions tool. This is something that we discussed a bit in the February meeting, but also in the March Science Advisory Group meeting, this open source tool that will help us estimate how different actions reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And then we'll also utilize national net zero pathway research. So our planning team will take on putting together a rough estimate of what that reduction potential looks like. So just to frame for you all that there is no need to consider the emission reduction potential in your evaluation of the impacts, because that's what we will be doing. You guys can focus on the other fundamental objectives. And what we're doing with the input you all give us as I mentioned, we're compiling and synthesizing and presenting this to the task force in their June meeting. So after we receive your surveys on May 17th, we'll compile and organize your work to present these findings at the June 8th task force meeting. And so that will really serve to inform discussions on the high-level direction and considerations to have positive outcomes for Louisiana's people, economy, and environment. And so we'll do this through graphs that synthesize rankings alongside your short answer feedback for the task force. So we won't change any of your results, we'll just compile it for the task force to tee up that discussion. And so with that, we would like you guys to look at these portfolios independently and not ranking them relative to each other, but we'll be taking a look at each of these independently with the task force, so ask that you guys do the same in your evaluation. So before I pass it over to Supi at the Water Institute, just wanted to overview the documents that you all received. So the packets were customized for each of your advisory group based on which fundamental objectives that you would be reviewing, but everyone received 4 documents. So first, the survey instructions, the actual form in the Excel spreadsheet, the hypothetical portfolios, and then evaluation criteria. So I just wanted to touch on each really quickly. The first one in the survey instructions is really laying out the background and purpose of the evaluation, similar to what I just walked through with you all, alongside some steps of how to complete the survey and guidance to keep in mind in your evaluation. The second document is the survey form that we sent you all. And so the first tab at the bottom offers some instructions on completing the survey, and the other tabs at the bottom offer those 5 emission reduction scenarios, so what we framed as the hypothetical strategy portfolios. So if you go under one of those tabs, this graphic on the bottom right-hand corner that shows the table in the Excel spreadsheet for each of the scenarios will include a few different columns, as you see. So there's a predicted outcome, how confident you are in that outcome, how widespread the impacts of the outcome might be, and then when do you expect this outcome to begin. So all of those questions have drop-down menus and allow you to select one of a few different answers. And that predicted outcome column is what we refer to as the scoring, so the very positive to very negative score. And then there are a few columns, right, that just are meant to prompt your thinking and prompt you in writing those narrative responses. As we had mentioned in the March meetings, this is where we want to focus your feedback, is in those narrative responses. And the columns are organized according to the fundamental objectives that your group is reviewing. So as you can see here, there's the managing for short and long-term success category, and then the objectives within that are the columns that you will then fill out in accordance with those questions. And the next document is the portfolios. It starts with an overarching introduction to the portfolios, as noted right here, and then a description on each portfolio to evaluate that notes some boundaries, assumptions, and limitations of each. And then there are strategies inside of each portfolio that are meant to help and provide the context, further build out what the portfolio looks like. And these strategies were developed with help from the sector committees and their March meetings. And so that's what each portfolio will look like as you move through the evaluation. The last document that I will frame is the evaluation criteria that you all received. And this is really just guidance to use in evaluating each portfolio for each objective. So we've created this scale, as I mentioned, on the predicted outcome of very negative to very positive, and we wanted to provide some consistency and standardization in what that evaluation looks like. So for that reason, created the guidance. We worked with you all in your March meetings to think through what this guidance should look like and have incorporated that, as well as comments you all sent to me after those meetings in our development of this evaluation criteria. So these criteria aren't intended to be fully comprehensive of everything important under the objective, but they should be helpful indicators in that evaluation. And so the last thing I note, it may be difficult to predict outcomes for these strategy portfolios since there are a mix of positive and negative outcomes, or it may really depend on how the different strategies are implemented. And so that's what we would like you all to express to us in your evaluation. What is the mix of positive and negative outcomes? How does it depend on implementation? Or what will we need to focus on in implementation so that it could score higher, so that it could have a higher predicted outcome? So those are the types of questions that we would like to get your feedback on. And so we've tried to design the survey in a way that can solicit your feedback in that way. And so that's why we wanted to bring focus to the narrative responses, but offer the evaluation criteria in guiding you all in completing that evaluation. Also having one question on the survey if there are other evaluation criteria or other things that have helped you in performing this evaluation, because we want to use the feedback from you guys on this, on just the structure of this first round, so that we can make it even stronger for the second round in August through September. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Supi Dallander from the Water Institute real quick. I think she's going to walk through a few of the documents, and then we'll open it up to Q&A.
Thank you, Lindsay. And like Lindsay was saying, I'm just going to take a couple minutes. I've filled out surveys like these for other projects, not on these topics, and just kind of to show what I do, and you can take or leave it, and and hopefully it's helpful. But just to kind of to do a quick walkthrough. So like Lindsay said, you'll have these 4 documents that she mentioned. It'll look a little bit different. There's because the advisory groups are evaluating different objectives. So some of them are, have an extension showing that they're for your advisory group. The first thing, as we mentioned, is the instructions. I know personally, my instinct is to jump right in and worry about the instructions later. In this case, it's good to have a look through the instructions. Like Lindsay was saying, there is a the tips at the end and guidance, some of the big high level things, so that if you're looking at this and you don't have this meeting fresh in your mind, there's some key things there that you can kind of refresh yourself on. The second piece, the survey itself. So as Lindsay was saying, the first tab is the instructions. It has a place for you to put in your name and your organization. When you go into each tab represents one of the portfolios. I've got this zoomed in a bit. You can zoom in. You can use the tools in Excel to highlight different, use different colors to track where you are. To focus in, because it can be a little overwhelming when you look at the spreadsheet, as a whole. What I personally found works when I'm doing this is, I'll open up the hypothetical strategy portfolios. I might skim through all of them and then really kind of focus in on one of them. I'm not usually a big fan of printing things, but sometimes with this, it's helpful to, have a printout so that you can have a couple things, right in front of you that works well for me, to kind of go through, read the strategies, think about it. The same with the evaluation criteria. So there's, the criteria, like Lindsay was saying, these are some guidance to help thinking about and giving the ranking. That's something else. You'll notice right away, one of the things that'll jump out is that when you're going from very positive to very negative, the same types of criteria are given. It's just giving you some framing on what, very positive might mean for those criteria. So, again, this is something when I'm doing these, I usually kind of scan through and then, focus in on one objective and portfolio at a time. And again, have this, open on a second screen or have it, printed out something that I can look at more as like a reference to kind of go back and forth. I'll be honest, when you're looking at some of these fundamental objectives, especially at the strategy level, and you look at this drop down and it's saying, is this very negative, very positive? I can pretty much guarantee that for one, more, possibly all of them, you'll say, oh, I can't evaluate that. That really depends on if you do this way or that way. And that, again, like what Lindsay was saying, that's exactly the kind of feedback we want, especially at this, part where we're still framing actions. We've tried to, that's one of the reasons there's so many columns in this, is so that, if you look at an objective and you say, well, I can't, if you did it this way, it'd be a great outcome, but if you do it this way, it's bad. Put in those details, the specifics of what you mean by how do you get to those golden opportunities versus how do you, what would be a negative outcome that would result. So like Lindsay was saying, we're not doing this to get some kind of magic score. There's not a wrong answer. The whole idea is to put this framework in place so that it helps, in you and thinking about brainstorming. That's why the portfolios are kind of in that member state, so that, kind of turning up the knobs all the way, so that it's a way for you to think through, those hows and those details, so that you can give us that outcome, but that you can also fill in the put out what's in your head, so that we have it in front of us to be able to understand, those positive and negative outcomes. And so again, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. The other tip I might mention, so, for example, here we have one that's on natural resources. There's evaluation criteria related to that. You don't have to, we want you to use your expert judgment for this. However, this isn't a closed book test. You're welcome and encouraged to use the resources that are outlined in some of the portfolios, or your own, desktop research. Please, anything that you use like that, because that might be helpful for someone else and for us to know the context, drop in the other comments, put that information there. Because really can't emphasize enough that, the short answer feedback, the thoughts that all of this prompts in your heads is more important in a lot of ways than the actual, outcome at this stage. It's really to get as much information and as much of your knowledge in a structured form so that it doesn't fall through the cracks. Yeah, I think I'll stop there and turn it back to Lindsay, and I think we can do questions and answers.
Thanks, Supi. Yeah, we can open it up. If anyone has questions on what Supi and I just walked through, or on your own review or look through of the evaluation, or anything that we can bring light to, we'd be happy to answer those questions for you all.
I'll ask. Hey, Lindsay, it's Steve Cochran. I can't ever tell who can see who, so I'll just talk. Thanks for doing this. I guess I'd like a little bit of, I appreciate Supi's description, because my reaction, one of my reactions in looking at this was, well, it depends. And I kept saying that every time I looked at anything. And so I want to get as much, I guess, guidance as possible about what is most useful in terms of doing that for you guys. I think, Supi, you started to talk about that, but I'd just like to hear a little bit more, because the other piece of that is that the way you guys have laid this out isn't really what would typically be called a portfolio in the parlance of climate change world, because a portfolio is really sort of what Princeton provided, right? Which is a mixture of all of pieces of these things, which I know you know. So I'm trying to also think about how to provide our own recommendations relative to that, because you'll be talking about some of this and some of that from each of these portfolios to some extent. Most people will be doing that, I would think. What's useful there from y'all's perspective in terms of how we feed back to you that element of this discussion?
Thanks, Steve. That's
a useful question. I can't quite tell if that's a good question.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that. Supi, since you started on that, I'll let you kick it off and I can pick up.
Sure. So, with the it depends, what we'd ask is that, take it a little farther, and again, that is one of the reasons these portfolios do look a little bit different, is to enable that thought experiment. So, for example, I think one that has come up quite a bit before, one of the portfolios is electrification intensive. So that would be, a change in, the way, increasing renewable energy, et cetera. So, whether that's positive or negative, for example, for the economy, it depends, right? Because it depends on whether there is investment in training. It would depend on where, what communities have access to that training, timescales for how that's implemented. And so it's that kind of detail, when you use your best judgment in giving the outcome, but it's that detail in, there's a spot in the spreadsheet, a column for like golden opportunities. So, training programs that are focused in communities that have not, benefited previously might be a way to improve the outcome across either an economy or an equity oriented objective. So it's, what I'd say as far as it depends is to, take it the next step kind of in your mind, as far as the how it depends to encapsulate that. And that also kind of ties to your second question, about pathways versus portfolios and a balanced approach. The reason that we're, here is focused more on evaluation versus recommendation is, again, from that sort of thought experiment perspective of being able to, to isolate, some of these strategies that might go together to enable your input on, again, the how. Particularly where we are in the process now, because we're, in action development, we're in refining, we wanted to split them up this way so that, it would enable to kind of, drill down and think about, especially because, actions or recommendations or thoughts on the implementation that may not, it may be difficult when people are thinking about actions to put like in the, the great template that was online for people to submit actions, a lot of the focus there is on the net greenhouse gas emission reduction. So this is a, thought experiment in a way to focus on some of the details and how that they might, it might not be a standalone, it might not be something that on its own reduces greenhouse gas emissions, that how, that like investment in training is that example. So this is a mechanism to make sure there's really important considerations that might not, jump into someone's mind as far as, well, how would you reduce greenhouse gas emissions? This is a way to make sure that advisory group input comes into play so that when, the pathway, the balanced portfolios are looked at, and we do have a second round for this, that those considerations can go in, because we are trying to do this fast. We want to make sure we get to good options when we're getting to that point. So this is a way to kind of get out ahead of that and get some input on it before they're, as the process is happening. Lindsay, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
That sparked an idea in me too, Steve, since we're in the beginning stages of refining and organizing and gap filling, combining all of the emission reduction actions that we just received from the committees, that they'll be moving forward, that the task force will be also reviewing this summer. It helps us understand also what do we need to be aware of in that action process. And it provides a little insight on the front end of some things that the task force might need to be aware of at a higher level as we're looking more towards those actions, as we're thinking about implementation pathways. It matters a lot in how we do that implementation. And so we want now to just have some foresight into how do we implement these things well? What are the potential concerns that we might have, even on that more granular level, so that we're not going into the second action-focused round of evaluation and then everything is just wrong and everything just scores a very negative on all of the advisory group objectives. So wanting to have that initial run-through to help us as the planning team, to also help the task force have some foresight, and the committees as well. We would like them to have some insight into what are these necessary considerations to have on the front end. And Rob, I'm sorry, not Rob, I was looking at Rob, but Steve, to your first question that you had on, or I guess your second question on pathways, it's important for us to isolate these emission reduction scenarios. We know that it will be some combination of all of these emission reduction scenarios, but wanted to isolate them to just understand on their own what is their potential to impact our objectives to reduce emissions, so that we can understand what sort of focus or what sort of prioritization do these different high-level paths have. So you're right, it's not exactly mirroring the pathway research for that reason, so that we can have a little bit of isolated insight.
One thing I would just maybe add there as well as just like to synthesize, I think the difference between the pathways and the portfolios as we've framed them is that the pathways are sort of all potentially right answers, right? We have all different ways in which you're getting to net zero in terms of that person pathways research. We know that none of these individually are the right answer in the portfolios that we've put together. So the other, I think, important thing to frame there is, and we're not trying to help get to an answer of which one of these 5. We're trying to kind of tease out at this stage, we're not there yet, right? We want to tease out what those really important considerations in these kind of extreme scenarios are so that we can get there better in the next round.
Got it. Thank you.
And I see Rob's hand and then Alex's hand, if we could go in that order. Thanks.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having this session. My question, I think, is a little related to Steve's, but it's also related to my role on the legal advisory group. And I guess what I'm wondering about is a little bit more guidance on the granularity. So you showed an example, for instance, on the slide about maximizing public confidence, and my answer would have to be, it depends on implementation for everyone, because if you look underneath, it says, is there a comprehensive plan? Is there community engagement? Is it supported by well-founded, unbiased information? And as a lawyer, I'm thinking, well, to make this legally defensible, whatever I choose has to have a comprehensive plan, has to have community engagement, has to be supported by unbiased, informed information, so on. I mean, I could write that down on everyone, but that's really just reciting the evaluative factors again. Or I could say, well, here's my idea for a comprehensive plan for each one of them, but you don't want that either. And so I guess I'm wondering what I should be answering, or if there is a box where I can say, because I can tell already from a legal point of view, I can't rate any of them a positive or a negative. The answer is always going to be, well, it depends how well you follow the law. It depends how well, whatever. So you get my point, but I guess I'm just seeking a little guidance. And I have a second question, which is unrelated, and that's simply to know if you know when the draft GHG inventory will be available. That's the second question I have.
Rob, just on your second point real quick, I'll address that. So we'll be presenting the draft inventory at the July 29th task force meeting. So it's undergoing, I think it's in the preliminary draft stages, so there is like a preliminary draft of results put together, but the draft report itself will be presented to the task force in our late July meeting.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And then to the first point you raised, I'll hand it over to Subi in a second, but just an initial thought that I had is that it is helpful to hear across those objectives some overarching thoughts that you think are necessary to be included, so that we ensure that the objective is met, or to ensure that it can score very positive. So these are the things that we would need to ensure that this scores very positive. Subi, do you have additional thoughts?
The one thing I would add, so I agree, and some of them are going to be more prone to this than others. Like you said, some of the ones as far as in that short and long-term success and in confidence, things like that, are gonna be very action specific. I think it's useful to note, that keeping in mind that the guidance criterion were developed for this. So, I mean, there's possible that there's some, key ones that are missing, and there is a column to note that. So, I think if there are any, if the answer is that all of these, should be done in order for this to become relevant, going ahead and noting that, noting if there are gaps in specific things in the criteria, that are, should either be added as indicators or things that would be, incorporated as actions. If there are specific indicators that you think are more important, than others, that noting that, you're correct. I would not write a sort of comprehensive plan, for each of the portfolios, but if there are things that really, jump out as being, based on your legal expertise, specific things that would be, based on prior experience, that would either be a way to, lessons learned, I would note that. Is that helpful for your question?
And Rob, there's a question on the survey about what specific possibilities did this portfolio raise relevant to the objective. I also see that that's a great place to raise some of these ideas that you mentioned, that it would be necessary, or this could easily score very positive if we did fulfill these golden opportunities.
Let's go to Alex Kolker.
All right. Hey, thanks for pulling this session together. I think it's just a huge help to sort of figure out this process. So I want to thank you all for organizing it and taking some time. I guess I've got two questions and comments. Also, I'll do them sequentially. My first one is, it seems like the spreadsheet should have something on, scientific and technical functionality. I mean, there are things that are in, there's sort of this sort of general statement about maximizing, the goals of the task force, but, many of these strategies and many greenhouse gas reduction strategies involve technologies that are in some phase of development, and often varying different phases of development. And so whether or not some of these are good ideas depends on just like, if they work, do they work today? Might they work, 5 or 10 years from now? Will they work 30 years from now? And so I think that there needs to be something on that, on that spreadsheet about just technicalities. And does this rely on, what technologies does this rely on, and in what timescales do we expect those technologies to be functional? Is there a way to add that?
So I would actually recommend using there's under the short and long-term success, there's two. There's one on efficiency and effectiveness of strategies, and then there's another on timely implementation. And I would use those two to note, those specific concerns as far as technology that are related to those portfolios that should really be highlighted, because I think you make a really excellent point. And I would utilize those spaces and add it in that column, for criteria to note that, because we want to learn from this also for using this down the line with the action. So I think that's also something you could note, as far as criteria to add.
Okay. And then I'm also, maybe I've got 3 other questions. I'm also a little confused. You say that these are hypothetical portfolios, but at the same time, we're evaluating them. So like, are we, I'm a little confused. Are we like evaluating hypothetical things that don't exist, that aren't gonna be, or like, is this just like an exercise in how well the spreadsheet works? Or is this like an exercise in like actually evaluating these portfolios? I'm a little bit confused because the email sort of suggested that it was, these portfolios were only hypothetical, but this call makes me think that these portfolios are things that our goal of evaluating this is to evaluate these portfolios. So can you clarify that?
Yes, I hope so. So the strategies are very real. The strategies are strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The sorting into portfolios are, turning up the knob, end member cases. The reason we use the word hypothetical was because we were concerned that if we didn't use that to describe the portfolios as a whole, that people would think that we were sort of proposing that, you could just do reduced demand and that might be the answer. And so it's the hypothetical only applies to the portfolios as far as being, a group that would then become, a final answer all by itself. But all of the strategies are they're not hypothetical in that sense.
Okay, that's helpful to hear. And then I guess my final question, it sort of relates to that, is I'm confused as to how this is going to relate to the action templates that we just submitted. A lot of people in the community spent a lot of time writing these action templates, and these all came through before those action templates came through. So, and also like just in general, these are kind of 2 totally different perspectives. The action template seems to be a very bottom-up approach, And this overall strategy seems to be a very top-down approach. I can see pluses and minuses to each one, but they seem to be very different. Can you expand on how that's going to fit together?
Alex, this is going back to what we mentioned in the February all-hands meeting. Right now, we're kind of operating at two different tracks. So the advisory groups are operating at this high level. You guys are doing this high level evaluation that touches on strategies, which the committees work through in March, but not on the actions that have just been developed. So we're kind of on this granular action level track, but then also on this high level strategy track. And if we had a couple years to do this process, ideally we would separate them and we would first do this high level path process first and then dive into the actions. But the real significance here in framing these hypothetical scenarios and doing this evaluation of turning all the knobs on, it's not just a thought experiment to make you guys do more work than you ought to do, but it's helping us to see what really is the potential if we pursue that reduced energy demand, consumption, and waste-intensive portfolio. Or what if we fully pursue that zero carbon technology or the CCUS intensive? What does that amount to? What is the potential impact of that? And so we don't want to focus all of our actions on, let's say, electrification, if that doesn't actually amount to much of an emission reduction, or if that really negatively impacts our objectives. So we have to take that higher level approach to understand from the bigger picture scale, what are the impacts at this high level? So then as we move forward with those actions in round two, then we understand how they fit into the bigger picture of emission reductions. So I know it is challenging to operate at those two different scales, and they do come together after the summer months. As I mentioned in that second round of evaluation, we will bring in the actions for the evaluation you all will perform. But this first pass is really to understand that high level. Where do we need to prioritize our resources in our actions and our climate plan, and where will really amount to emission reductions, where will amount to positive or negative impacts on our objectives. So that's kind of what this whole process will frame, and then they will converge as we move forward. Does that help put in context?
That's super helpful, Lindsay. Yeah, thanks for that. So thanks for those answering those three questions, both Lindsay and Suki. So thank you all.
Thanks, Alex. Does anyone else have questions? Charles says we don't have any hands raised.
Hey, this is Brad Lambert. Just a kind of a real practical question. Any idea of how much time we should try to block out for ourselves to try to complete the survey?
It entirely depends on the group. So our equity group and our legal group have the biggest tasks in front of them in evaluation. Supi, what would you say in time allotment for these? Maybe per portfolio or per objective?
You know, I think, you know, order of magnitude, a few hours, like Lindsay said, it's a little hard because they're varying by objectives, and some of them, you know, you may suggest, or people may be more comfortable, you know, hitting, you know, using references more, you know, as far as looking at some other things. So it you know, it can vary. The other thing, and I don't think I forgot to reiterate this in the instruction as well, is if there is you know, an objective that you're not comfortable doing, that, you know, it'd be like, I have to go take a little mini course on this in order to be able to feel comfortable doing this. You know, you're able to skip them, you know, and similarly, if there's a, you know, a column in one of them that it's, you know, you don't have feedback that fits in that column, you know, but please do put whatever feedback you have. But if you know, if there's nothing there, it's not a, you know, it's not an issue for there to be a blank. But that's what I would say as far as, you know, order of magnitude, a few hours.
And since you all, as our advisory groups, won't meet for the next couple of months, I feel like it can equate well. So if you don't come back together until August, and that's like 3 3-hour meetings, that's like 9 hours total. I don't think it would even take you 9 hours total to do this survey, but the reason we went light on meetings for you all over the next couple of months is to bring focus and to bring your time to doing this evaluation.
And this is, these responses are due on the 17th of May, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That way we can turn it around for the June task force meeting.
Yeah. So Brad, that means you got about 9 days. I think that's the answer.
Again, you know, with the legislature in town through June 10th, I'm just trying to
Yeah,
manage time.
Right.
With you on that, Brad. Are there any additional questions? And I forgot to mention, but I'm happy to take any questions over the phone or over email as we move forward in the next couple of weeks. I know some of this might take time to make sense until you actually start filling out the survey.
I see Rob has his hand back up. Thanks, Rob.
Okay.
Yeah, Brad has inspired me. So for an advisory group to be meeting to get this work done, how are those meetings going to be arranged? They're going to have to be public, right? And so how do you see this process going forward as the groups meet?
These are individual surveys, so each member will submit a survey. So we're not going for consensus across the advisory group, but each member of the advisory group will submit their own survey, because we know expertise is different across membership.
Right, but
and realize there might not be consensus.
So no, but that I understand, but it might be helpful, I'm thinking, at least for members of an advisory group to all have an agreement about like at what scale or resolution are they going to be answering the questions on, or what assumptions. If I make assumption, you know, we're all going to have to make certain kinds of assumptions about this. At least we should all be working at the same scale, or with the same assumptions, or with the same sensibility, for lack of a better word. Is there, I mean, is the idea maybe that some of us could work in smaller groups that aren't as we did in our previous exercise, or are we really supposed to just be, you know, do your own work sort of thing? I'm just curious.
We tried to lay out some assumptions and limitations and boundaries in the portfolios themselves. And in this round, it would be helpful to have a more individual analysis, but also realize that it is helpful to work with members of the alike group and alike expertise. So I would say that is fine if Juby agrees with me on that.
Eric Smith, do you have a question?
Yeah, I had some correspondence with Lindsay earlier, or end of last week, concerning the LSU report that came out with sort of preliminary data. And my concern is that the data doesn't discriminate hydrogen. It also doesn't discriminate between processed CO2 and combustion CO2. And I don't really see the scientific advisory group, and this is just an opinion of one, bear in mind, but I don't see us being able to be very useful to the other operational committees unless we have that sort of data. So we have two choices. We can either speed up the process of getting that data available from David, which he's not working for me, so obviously I can't tell him to do that. Or we can simply extend the time frame and say once the data is available, we can use it to opine on the various processes and improvements that are being proposed. But right now we're kind of in a quandary because we've got a you know, sort of tight deadline schedule and we don't have the data we need. It doesn't help us, quite frankly, to tell us that we can't make computer chips. You know, it does help us to figure out how much hydrogen is required to run the CF Industries ammonia plant.
Eric, you are speaking to a different a review process. So just for the awareness of the other advisory members, the science advisory group is providing some review on the preliminary results of the greenhouse gas inventory update right now. Very raw preliminary data, but providing a review anonymously on some of those different components. So Eric, that's a question related to the SAG review process for the science advisory members. And that's something that you and I can touch base on offline, since that's separate from what we're discussing here. But it just to note that the review that will be done there is also very preliminary, and you can absolutely note where the gaps lie that you might need to know there.
Well, I'm just saying, to the degree that that's I presume our job is to review the scientific appropriateness of any recommendations, even if we're talking about hypothetical case studies, which is what you're focused on today. It's not very hypothetical if we can't say how much CO2 is being emitted and in what form. That's pretty basic to the process. So if nothing else, it's a forewarning to the other advisory committees that you know the information may be a little late in arriving to make any kind of definitive decisions, even about a hypothetical case. For sure about a hypothetical case.
And as I mentioned, Eric, our planning team will be working on the emission reduction potential of each of these hypothetical portfolios. So you all don't have to do any number crunching or calculating. That's information that we will work through and put together for the task force. So the burden's not on you guys to figure all of that out.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Lindsay, it's Steve Cochran again. One other quick question, and you may have already covered this, so if you did, I apologize. Scoring, that's not numerical, right?
Right. The scoring it will be that first column in the survey under predicted outcome. It's the very negative to very positive scale.
Right.
And we're not framing this, I meant to say this in my initial slides, but we're not framing this for the task force to choose one of the portfolios through those scores. It's just a consolidated way to say, overall, this portfolio looked like this. And then we'll provide the narrative responses as well. Does that make sense?
Well, sort of. I'm just trying to figure out what, at the end of the day, scoring can take on an outsized role if you're not careful, and I don't think you intend that to occur here. So that's what I'm trying to understand, what the output of a scoring system would be. If it's not going to do a lot of good for people to be arguing after the fact about what score was given to what portfolio. And so I'm just trying to understand what that looks like on the outside. You've got a set of people doing individual reviews. They all have different levels of expertise, different levels of understanding. Yet they will all be giving a score, which I assume will be looked at equally because you don't really know what level of expertise people have. And then that all gets rolled up into one declaration about the portfolio. So I'm just trying to sort through what that actually turns out to mean. Not only what you want it to mean, but what it could how it could be perceived publicly in the process. So anyway, this is not really helpful to you. I'm just trying to think through what
That's great. The hand motions definitely help. So Supi is our ultimate number cruncher and is going to help do this synthesis. So I'm going to let her answer that one from how she's going to approach it.
Yeah, and actually, I'm not crunching numbers because we're not doing like a scoring. What we'll do, for this, and especially keep in mind, that we will do a similar process at the actions too. So here, understanding that there's, because a lot of these maybe it depends. We'll be, have essentially like a table that kind of synthesizes whether the bulk of, answers for a given objective, whether they were, the very positive, very negative, whatever the bulk was. We're also going to, depending on the range of responses, it may be that, we come in and we have a small spread, everybody thinks that one is in that positive, and then that, that's the useful information to give. if we have a lot of spread, we'll also show the spread in the, in the answers, show there's uncertainty. And then again, like what Lindsay was saying, the key here is the short answer and the considerations that get synthesized to give that information, because we are not, there's not going to be a number associated to those ranking levels. There's not going to be like a, add all these together and get some kind of a score and weighting or anything like that. It is just to show the like the most often given answer and the spread of answers, as a quick reference. And then again, for each of the portfolios, there'll be the bulletin narrative summarizing the responses, because that's at this stage much more important. So we are very cognizant about not adding these up into some kind of a score that then has magic meaning, because that's not the goal here. So there's not going to be anything combined across the objective and a score like that. That's not part of this process.
I might suggest that you consider dropping the word scoring and don't use it to describe what the outcome is. That has implication to it. Just the word scoring that you probably don't want to leave here. So
gotcha. Ranking, evaluation, yep.
Chief Dardar, I see your hand.
Good morning, everyone. So, of course, in looking at this, right, my whole job is being Indigenous. And while I can see that you did touch on things like cultural preservation and traditional ecological knowledge, tribal language is very specific. And there is nothing in there that relates to being specific in regards to tribes that have treaties like my own, who, quite frankly, the damn thing was being violated before the ink dried, okay? And it's still being violated today. So I guess with this amount of time that we have to work on this, that's not going to give me a lot of time to interact with the other tribal nations in this state, but I'll do the best that I can. And just trying to figure out how to give those recommendations for that very specific language that really needs to be included in this stuff. Like, seriously, these are laws, okay? So it's one thing to talk about cultural preservation. That's wonderful. We all have culture. But when it comes to tribes, there is very specific language that has got to be included in that. And I can provide that. But how we're going to make that work, I don't know. I mean, we might have to really sit down and figure that out.
And Chief, we would love to sit down and figure that out with you. So I would point to the question on the survey about additional criteria that helps in your evaluation, but I agree with you that we should speak further to that. And since the second round of evaluation won't be until August, we have a little bit of time. So I'd love over the next few months to workshop with you how we can improve that in the second round. Thank you for letting us know about that. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's greatly
I think
appreciated.
That's a really valid point, that we are doing another round of this. We are very cognizant of that. So we do want to make sure that this for the second round. So that's another reason to get this in front of y'all now, is to get your input.
Absolutely. So we're good. Are there any more questions? Additional thoughts? And you all can be free to hop off as your questions are answered and you feel satisfied about the survey. Colleen, Subi, and I might stay on for a little while to see if anyone hops on at 11, but you all can hop off if you feel more confident in the survey. And again, I'm more than glad to answer questions as we move forward over the next month in doing this.
I just want to say thank you. I think this was very helpful.
Thanks, Monica.
Thank you.
for those of you who are still hanging out on the call, are there any more questions or anything that we can talk through with you guys?
Thanks, Lindsay.
Now, Lindsay, I didn't mean to interrupt the thought process. I simply am a little bit concerned about this, making sure we have the information the committees need to provide useful information. So if we can talk about that later, that's fine.
Yeah, Eric, I'll give you a call this afternoon and we can chat through that.
Okay. I've had exchanges with David. I think David and I are in good shape. It's just, how does it impact the group?
That sounds great. I know I missed all the emails yesterday, so I'll catch up on that too.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the meeting today too.
Thank you for coming. Maybe Colleen and Allison, are you guys good to just hang out for a little while? See if we have anyone else hop on.
Yeah, no problem.